It's 2 in the morning. A desert highway. Rain hammering the asphalt so hard it sounds like static on a broken radio. And somewhere between nowhere and forgotten, a lonely roadside diner is the only thing glowing in the dark. Inside, most people see an ordinary scene. A tired waitress. A trucker half asleep over cold eggs. 2 travelers minding their own business near the window. And in the far corner booth, a man. Quiet. Still. With a German shepherd lying at his feet. Nothing remarkable. Nothing to look twice at. But here's what those people couldn't see. The man had spent years in places that don't show up on maps, doing things that never made it into reports. He had learned to read danger the way most people read weather, not by looking at the sky, but by feeling the air change before a single cloud appears. And tonight the air was about to change. Because the door was about to open. And when it did, a soaked, trembling, terrified elderly woman was going to walk past every single person in that diner, and stop right at his table. She was going to lean close, grip the edge of his booth with shaking fingers, and whisper 4 words that would unravel everything. Please pretend you're my grandson. And nothing, for either of them, would ever be the same again. If you've ever felt invisible. If you've ever been the only one in a room willing to do the right thing when it costs something, this story is for you. We tell stories here about ordinary people caught in extraordinary moments. About the kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. Stay with us until the end, because this one builds, and when it pays off, you're going to feel it. Like this video if you believe one person can still make a difference. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Now, let's go back to that diner. His name was Ryan Carter. 35 years old. And if you had looked at him that night, really looked, you might have sensed something that was hard to put into words. He wasn't large in an intimidating way, not the kind of big that announces itself. He was built the way certain structures are built, quietly, completely, with no wasted material. Broad shoulders, a powerful chest beneath a worn green tactical shirt with camouflage sleeves that had seen better days. Dark hair, military cut. A jaw that carried a few days of stubble, unhurried, unnoticed. But it was his eyes that gave him away, if you knew what you were looking for. They never stopped moving. Not anxiously. Not nervously. The way a surveillance camera moves. Steady, sweeping, methodical. Every few seconds, they completed a circuit, the door, the windows, the counter, the other patrons, and then back again. He had long ago stopped doing this consciously. It had become as natural as breathing. Ryan Carter, former United States Navy SEAL, sat with his back to the wall because he had never once in his adult life chosen any other seat. He had left the Navy 3 years prior, and the transition had not been gentle. The world outside the service is not built for men who have been reshaped by it. There were no clear missions anymore. No chain of command. No purpose that snapped neatly into place each morning when you opened your eyes. There had been jobs, security shifts that paid just enough, handyman work, whatever people would hire him for. There had been rooms he rented that were barely rooms at all. There had been meals that were smaller than they should have been. But through all of it, not once did Max go without. Max, 6 years old. A German shepherd with a black and tan coat so precisely maintained it looked almost painted. Amber eyes that were calm and alert simultaneously, the kind of eyes you found only in dogs that had been trained by someone who understood that discipline and gentleness were not opposites. He lay beside the booth now, his chin resting on his front paws, but nothing about his posture suggested sleep. His ears stood tall, rotating almost imperceptibly with each new sound. The clink of Linda's coffee pot. The low groan of the trucker shifting on his stool. The distant moan of the highway wind against the glass. Max processed all of it. Filed it away. Found nothing requiring action. Not yet. On the table in front of Ryan sat a plate. Cheap grilled meat, the kind that appears on diner menus under names that oversell them. Ryan had already moved most of it to the floor near Max's position. He kept a thin portion for himself, lifted his coffee, tasted the familiar bitterness, and set it down again. This was a Tuesday. Or a Wednesday. He'd stopped tracking which with any precision. Across the counter, Linda moved with the efficiency of someone who had perfected the smallest possible version of every motion. Tall, a little thin, faded blonde hair loose at the back of her neck. Her eyes were kind, the kind that noticed things and chose not to mention most of them. She had worked this shift long enough that the night had stopped surprising her. Almost. The door chimed. And something changed. Not dramatically. Not with crashing music or a sudden gasp. Something simply shifted. The way a room shifts when a window is open in winter. You feel it before you understand it. She was small. Barely 5 feet tall, if that. Wrapped in a gray wool coat that was soaked through, not just damp, soaked, the kind of wet that meant she had been walking in the rain for a very long time. Her white hair was thin and plastered to her temples. Her skin, pale even in good light, looked nearly translucent beneath the fluorescent glow of the diner ceiling. She could have been someone's grandmother. She could have been anyone's grandmother. But Ryan wasn't looking at any of that. He was looking at her eyes. They moved like the eyes of someone being chased, not checked, not glancing, darting. To the windows. To the doors she'd just come through. Across the diner. Back to the windows. Her chest rose and fell in short, uneven bursts. She wasn't breathing, she was surviving on breath, taking just enough to stay upright. Max lifted his head. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply looked. His amber gaze locked onto the woman with an attention so complete and so still that it was almost more unsettling than aggression would have been. Linda opened her mouth, the standard greeting, automatic, warm, but the woman didn't look at her. She walked straight toward the corner booth. Past the counter. Past the trucker. Past the travelers by the window who stopped whispering. People didn't walk toward Ryan Carter. That was simply a fact of the space he occupied. Something about him, the stillness, the size, the eyes that never entirely stopped working, kept most people at a comfortable distance without him ever asking for it. But she walked toward him. And she stopped right at the edge of his table. Her fingers found the tabletop, wrapped around it, white-knuckled, as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid and unreliable. Up close, Ryan could see the tracks her tears had left. Fresh ones. The kind that hadn't dried because she hadn't stopped long enough to let them. She leaned forward. Her voice was barely a sound at all. Barely above the rain. Please. A single word. Cracked in the middle. Please pretend you're my grandson. Ryan blinked once. Slow. Controlled. What? His voice came out low, the kind of quiet that wasn't soft, just restrained. A sound that had learned not to travel farther than it needed to. Before she could answer, headlights. They swept across the diner windows like a blade, bright and sudden and wrong. The woman's entire body locked up. Her hand shot from the table to Ryan's sleeve, fingers closing around it with a grip that had nothing gentle in it. They found me, she breathed. The words fractured as they came out. Please. Just for a minute. Please. Ryan turned his head, just slightly, toward the window. A black SUV sat in the parking lot. Engine running. Lights on. Still. Watching. Something moved in Ryan's chest. Not fear, he had not felt fear the way other people felt it for a very long time. What he felt was older than fear, quieter, and far more reliable. Recognition. The recognition of something wrong, arriving before it could be named. He exhaled slowly. Looked at the woman. Looked at the SUV. Looked at Max, who was already standing, body aligned forward, ears upright, eyes on the door. Then Ryan shifted in the booth. Moved toward the window side. Created space. Grandma, he said, and the word came out steady, certain, filled with a warmth he constructed from nothing in under 2 seconds, loud enough for the room to hear. I told you not to wander off in this weather." She didn't hesitate for a single beat. She slid in beside him and took his arm in both hands, the way people hold on to things they believe in. "Sorry, sweetheart," she whispered. Her voice still trembled. But she was playing along. The door chimed again. He didn't bring the stone with him, not the way she had. He brought something worse. The man in the gray suit stepped inside with the specific kind of calm that comes from never once doubting that the world would arrange itself around you. His suit was perfectly tailored, charcoal, expensive, impractical for the middle of a desert rainstorm, and completely untouched by it. His dark hair was neatly combed. Thin metal glasses rested exactly where they belonged on a face that was sharp, measured, controlled. He looked to be in his early 40s. His skin was smooth, not the smoothness of good health, but the smoothness of a life lived entirely indoors, in rooms where temperature was managed and outcomes were predetermined. His smile, when it came, was the kind assembled from memory. Correct angles. Correct duration. Nothing behind it. He scanned the room. Slowly. The way someone scans a room when they already know what they're looking for and are simply confirming it's still there. His eyes moved from the counter, to the trucker, to the travelers, to Ryan, to the old woman pressed against Ryan's side, to Max. And stopped. Behind him, through the gap of the still open door, two shadows resolved into shapes. The first was wide. Late 30s, shaved head, a beard that sat on his jaw like a permanent 5 o'clock shadow. His jacket was dark and heavy, the kind of jacket chosen for concealment over style. He moved the way large men move when they've spent years making other men remember their size. Deliberate. Unhurried. Certain. The second was lean and younger. His face was narrow and his eyes never stopped moving, not the way Ryan's eyes moved, with method and calm, but the way the eyes of someone who lives in the margins move. Calculating exits. Calculating odds. The restless arithmetic of a man who was always measuring risk. Neither spoke. Linda's hand came to rest on the counter's edge. Her knuckles went pale. The trucker quietly relocated to the far end of the diner without looking at anyone. The two travelers by the window went completely silent. The suited man walked toward the booth. And he stopped at the edge of Ryan's table. "I believe," he said, his voice practiced, even reasonable, "you've involved yourself in a situation you don't understand." Ryan picked up his coffee cup. Took a small sip. Set it down with careful precision. His eyes met the man's and did not move away. "That happens a lot," he said. The suited man tilted his head slightly, as if encountering an unexpected variable in an otherwise predictable equation. "My mother," he said, his tone softening with practiced reasonableness, "is not well. She becomes confused under stress. I'm sure you understand. It's important that she comes with me." The elderly woman shook her head, fast, sharp, the reflex of someone who has already had too much taken. "No," she whispered. Ryan studied the man the way he had been trained to study terrain, not looking for what was visible, but for what wasn't. "Funny thing," Ryan said slowly. "She seems pretty clear about not wanting that." Something moved behind the suited man's eyes. Not anger, that would have been easier to read. Something more calculated. A variable being adjusted. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," he said. "I'm offering you a chance to step away." Ryan leaned back. One arm along the back of the booth. The posture of a man with nowhere to be and nothing to prove. "I've had worse offers," he said. Max took one small step forward. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just a step. The kind that said, "There is a line here. I know where it is. Do you?" The lean enforcer noticed first. His gaze dropped to the dog, then jumped back to Ryan. "Dog should stay down," he muttered. Ryan didn't look at him. "Dog decides that," he replied. The suited man reached into his coat. Ryan's muscles made no visible movement, but something in him shifted, coiled, assessed, waited. His hand did not move. His expression did not change. But he was ready for almost anything. What emerged was a phone. The man held the screen outward. A photograph. The elderly woman standing beside him in it, dressed neatly, smiling, a large, beautiful house behind them. A picture that told a simple story. A picture that lied. Ryan didn't need long to see it. The woman in the photo stood too straight. The smile was perfectly shaped, but it ended precisely at the edges of her mouth. Her eyes, even in a still image, were somewhere else entirely. He looked at the real woman beside him. Shaking. Pale. Holding his sleeve like it was the last rope over a cliff. "Look familiar?" the suited man asked. Ryan turned slowly toward her. "You know him?" Her answer came without hesitation and without room for argument. "No." Her voice cracked and steadied at once. "He's lying." Ryan looked back at the man. "There it is," he said simply. The suited man's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Just enough. You're interfering with something far beyond your understanding." Ryan exhaled. Quiet. Almost to himself. "Yeah," he said. "That's usually when it matters." The broad enforcer moved then. One step. Slow. Heavy. His boots made a sound against the diner floor that was more statement than footfall. "We're done talking," he said. Max's ears angled forward. And Ryan stood up. The booth creaked with the transfer of weight. He rose to his full height, taller than any of them, broader than most, filling the space not with aggression but with presence. The kind you couldn't create on purpose. The kind that was simply there. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. The distance between them felt suddenly, inexplicably smaller. "You heard her," Ryan said. "She stays." Ryan lowered himself back into the booth slowly. Not retreat, strategy. Control over the space rather than surrender of it. The woman pressed close beside him, her breath coming in shallow intervals, her hands clenched around an old leather handbag in her lap. He hadn't noticed it before, or rather, he had catalogued it the way he catalogued everything, filed it without priority. Now he looked at it more carefully. It was old. The leather had cracked along the seams, the color faded unevenly. It was the kind of bag you kept not because it was beautiful, but because replacing it would mean letting go of something you weren't ready to release. She held it the way people hold things that cost more than money. Ryan's voice dropped so that only she could hear it. "Whatever this is," he said quietly. "It's not just about you." Her lips trembled. She didn't answer right away. Then her fingers tightened on the bag, knuckles going white, and something in her expression shifted. Fear was still there. But something else moved through it. Something like relief. Like she had been waiting a very long time to say what she was about to say to someone who would actually hear it. "They killed him," she whispered. Ryan didn't move. Didn't respond. He let the silence receive the words. "They said it was an accident," she continued. Her voice was thin, but it was steadying with each word, finding its own bottom, its own floor. "A car. Late at night. Wet road." She paused. "He never drove fast. In 42 years, he never once got a speeding ticket. He was careful. Always careful." "What did he do?" Ryan asked. She swallowed. "He was an accountant," she said. 42 years. Same company, same desk. He used to say numbers were the only honest thing left in the world." Her voice broke on that last word and reassembled itself. He believed that. And then? Her fingers found the top of the bag. Slowly, with the deliberateness of someone performing an action they have rehearsed 100 times in their mind, she opened it. Inside, documents. Thick, organized, wrapped in a plastic sleeve. Handwritten notes covering the margins in a small, precise hand. And beside them, a flash drive. Metal. Scratched. The kind of scratches that come not from being dropped, but from being used, over and over and over again. He found things, she said. Accounts that didn't match anything. Land deals that didn't exist on any public record. Money that moved, but never arrived where the paperwork said it would. Her voice steadied now, driven by something other than fear. Purpose. He wrote every detail down. Every account number. Every name. Every transaction that didn't make sense. Across the room, something changed. The suited man had stopped looking at Ryan. He was looking at the bag. Just the bag. Ryan noticed. And they knew, the woman whispered, before he could take it to anyone. They came to the house 2 nights before he died. Polite. Smiling. She almost laughed, but it had nowhere to go. They said he was confused. Making mistakes. Getting old. Her eyes met Ryan's. He wasn't confused. Ryan exhaled slowly through his nose. Max shifted, his nose lifted, rotating toward the broad enforcer with focused, chemical precision. Ryan caught the movement. "What is it?" he murmured, barely moving his lips. Max didn't look at him. Didn't need to. Ryan's gaze moved to the enforcer's jacket, specifically to the way it hung on the right side. The weight of it. The way the man kept that arm slightly away from his body. Weapon. Ryan's jaw tightened fractionally. He turned back to the woman. "You've been running?" She nodded. 3 days. Bus, then walking, then, just hiding. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to trust. And you chose here, Ryan said. It wasn't quite a question. Her eyes moved to him, apologetic, almost. I didn't choose, she said softly. I just saw you. Ryan paused with that for a moment. There was something in the answer that resisted being processed quickly. Not logic. Not strategy. Something simpler and somehow harder to argue with. The suited man's voice cut back in, tighter now, the civility thinning at its edges. That bag, he said, contains materials belonging to my organization. Ryan didn't look at him. The woman did. And for the first time since she'd walked through the door, her face did something other than fear. It hardened. No, she said, louder. Steadier. It doesn't belong to you. It never did. The room went very still. Ryan turned toward the suited man. Here's what I'm seeing, he said. His voice was calm. Completely calm. But no longer neutral. You came for a woman who's been running for 3 days. You brought backup. You're more interested in that bag than you were in her. He paused. That doesn't sound like family. The suited man's expression thinned. It sounds, Ryan continued, like cleanup. The word cleanup hung in the air of the diner like smoke that had no exit. The suited man was still. His enforcer behind him had stopped shifting. Even the lean one near the door had gone motionless. And for just a moment, just one, the controlled surface of the man in the gray suit showed something underneath it. Not fear. Not guilt. Something worse. Irritation at being seen. He adjusted his glasses. Slowly. The kind of small, precise gesture a person makes when they are buying their composure time to rebuild. You've heard enough, he said, the control back in place but thinner now, like ice in early spring. Hand over the bag, and this ends without unnecessary consequences. Ryan's gaze didn't waver. You keep saying that, he replied, almost gently. But nothing about this feels unnecessary to you. Behind the suited man, the broad enforcer rolled his shoulders once, the practiced loosening of a man who resolved situations with force and had done so often enough that it no longer required preparation. His posture shifted just slightly, from ready to almost. Linda had stopped pretending to work. She stood at the register, fingers on its edge, breathing in slow, controlled pulls, as if she were trying to take up less of the air in the room. She had worked nights for 11 years. She had seen drunks, seen arguments, seen one man throw a plate at another over a woman neither of them was worth. But she had never seen this. This was not anger. This was intent. Organized, cold, prepared intent. And it made the drunks and the arguments feel, in retrospect, like bedtime stories. Ryan moved. Not forward, across. One step that placed him fully between the woman and the men facing him. A small movement. A geometric one. But it changed everything about the room's arrangement. The woman was no longer visible past him. She was behind him, entirely, and that fact was not accidental. She drew a shaky breath. Her fingers found the bag. And she held it like something that mattered, because it did. Max lowered his head. Not submissive. Aligned. His body a coiled question waiting for an answer. The suited man looked at Ryan. You think standing there changes anything? Ryan considered that for exactly one beat. No, he said. But it tells you where you stop. The lean enforcer moved first. One step, testing, not committing. Checking what would happen. What happened was this: a sound rose from Max's chest. Not loud. Not wild. Precise. Controlled. A low, chest-level growl that was not thrown into the air generally, but directed. Specific. Like a laser that happened to be made of sound. The lean man froze. He was not afraid of dogs in general. But he understood, in the way the body understands things faster than the mind does, that this particular dog was not operating on instinct alone. This was trained will. This was a partner. This dog would not hesitate. The broad enforcer advanced next. Heavier. Slower. Inevitable. You don't want this, he said, his voice the sound of gravel through a machine. You're right, Ryan said. I don't. The man took another step. Ryan's hand lifted, just slightly. 3 inches off his side. Max stopped. Perfectly. The room held its breath. And then, faint. Far away but unmistakable, coming through the rain, through the glass, growing with each passing second, sirens. The suited man's eyes moved to the window. Someone called it in, Ryan said quietly. The man looked back. His jaw set. You've complicated things beyond repair, he said. Ryan shrugged, just barely. Or just made them visible. The broad enforcer exhaled through his nose. He glanced at the suited man, a single look that carried an entire conversation. This isn't clean anymore. This isn't what we planned for. Behind Ryan, the woman found her voice. It trembled, but it carried. He found everything, she said, louder than before. Louder than she'd said anything since she walked through that door. Every account. Every name. He wrote it all down. She lifted the bag slightly. And I have it. The words landed like something dropped from a height. The suited man's composure fractured. Just slightly. Just for a second. Enough, he said. Sharp. For the first time, genuinely sharp. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue light began to bleed through the rain, painting the diner walls in brief flashes, blues and reds that had no business being there, that belonged to a different kind of night than the one these walls were used to. The lean enforcer stepped back. Half a step. Then another. The broad one followed. Slower. Reluctant. But not blind to arithmetic. The suited man stood still the longest. He straightened his jacket, smoothed it, and the gesture was practiced enough to look like composure, but the seams of it showed. He was resetting, not restoring. This isn't over, he said quietly. Ryan tilted his head just slightly. Didn't think it was. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. The 3 of them walked through it without another word, without looking back, without the satisfaction of having the last motion. And then they were gone. For a moment, no one in the diner moved. The absence of tension takes time to register. The body believes in danger longer than the situation requires, because the cost of being wrong about safety is higher than the cost of being wrong about threat. So the room stayed still, Linda's hands on the counter, the travelers near the window motionless, the trucker studying the far wall with great concentration, until Max released a breath and settled his weight back to neutral. Ryan exhaled. He let his shoulders drop an inch. Then he turned around. The woman looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but not lost. For the first time since she had walked through that door, she looked like someone who had stopped running. Not because there was nowhere left to go, but because she had arrived somewhere. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Ryan shook his head. "Small. Quiet." "Yeah," he said softly. "I did." Outside, the patrol cars came to rest in the parking lot, tires hissing against the wet pavement. Red and blue lit the desert briefly and then settled into something steadier. Sheriff Daniel Reeves entered the diner with the particular movement of a man who had learned, through consequence, to never rush a scene before he understood it. Late 40s. Sandy hair going silver at the temples. A face that had been shaped by decades of choosing between what was easy and what was right, and bearing the cost of both. He looked at Ryan first, assessed him with the quiet speed of someone who had seen many kinds of men. Then at the woman. Then at the bag. He took the documents that night. Secured them. And what he found in the early hours of the next morning confirmed everything she had told Ryan across that cramped corner booth. Coordinated fraud. Land seizures spanning 3 counties. Money flowing through shell accounts into the hands of people whose names appeared in the right places, on donor lists, on charity boards, on the pages of local newspapers under headlines about growth and progress. People who had been moving in the open because no one had yet found the thread that connected all of it. Until a quiet accountant, 42 years at the same desk, who believed that numbers were the only honest thing left in the world, found it. And wrote it down. Every account. Every transaction. Every name. All of it now in the hands of a sheriff who had once watched a witness disappear and had carried that weight quietly for years, waiting for a moment to make it mean something different. The storm broke somewhere before dawn. Not dramatically, not with a final thunderclap or a clearing wind. It simply stopped, the way things do when they have run their course. And the desert, washed clean, lay flat and still under a pale stretch of early light that had no interest in drama. The diner settled back into itself. Linda made fresh coffee. The smell of it, no longer burned, no longer bitter with hours of sitting, moved through the space and said, "Morning." Normalcy. Resumption. The woman sat in the same booth where everything had begun. Her wet coat was still on her small frame, but the trembling was gone. She looked fragile, she would always look fragile, but the quality of the fragility had changed. This was not the fragility of something about to break. This was the fragility of something that had already survived the breaking. She looked at Ryan, who stood near the counter with a mug of coffee he hadn't yet touched. "You didn't ask what was in the bag," she said. He shrugged lightly. "Didn't need to." She studied him for a moment. Something moved across her face, something that had traveled a long distance to get there. "My husband used to say," she began, and her voice was careful with it, "the way you are careful with things that matter, that the right people don't ask. Because they already know when something matters." Ryan didn't answer right away. He had not been called the right person in a long time. He was not entirely sure he agreed. But Max walked over then, slow, deliberate, and leaned gently into the side of Ryan's leg. A dog's version of, "You are." Ryan rested his hand on Max's head, fingers finding the familiar warmth between his ears. The sheriff straightened from where he stood near the window. "We'll be placing her under protection," he said. "Until this is finished." It would not be finished quickly. These things never are. But they would be finished. The documents were real. The investigation would follow the threads wherever they went, and they went far. Names surfaced in the weeks that followed. Accounts were frozen. Men who had moved through the world with the smooth confidence of people who believed they were beyond consequence found themselves, one by one, illuminated. The accountant's handwriting, precise, patient, recorded across dozens of pages, became the foundation of something that outlasted him. That was its own kind of justice. Quiet and complete. The woman looked at Ryan before she left the diner in the company of the sheriff and 2 officers. "Will I see you again?" Ryan hesitated. He was not comfortable with promises. Promises required a version of the future that he had learned not to count on. "I'll be around," he said finally. She smiled then. A real smile, the kind that started somewhere deep and moved all the way up. "Then I suppose," she said, "I did find my grandson after all." Ryan exhaled, almost a laugh. "Not quite, but close." "Guess so." Ryan Carter stayed. Not because there was nowhere else to go, though for a long time, there hadn't been. He stayed because the sheriff offered him something modest and honest, and because those 2 qualities together were rarer than most people realized. Local security work. Occasional support when situations required someone calm. It wasn't the kind of work that filled a resume with impressive titles. But it was stable. It was real. And it was the kind of thing that, when you were done with it at the end of a day, you could put down and leave in the parking lot. He rented a small place on the edge of town. 1 room. 1 floorboards. A window that faced west, which meant that every evening, without fail, the dry land outside turned a shade of gold that looked like something from a painting he hadn't known to look for. There was space for Max, space for quiet. Space for mornings that began without dread. On one of those mornings, weeks after the night at the diner, the sun came through the window at an angle that made the dust in the air visible and somehow beautiful. Ryan sat at the small table with his coffee, watching Max lie near the door in a state of complete, unguarded rest. The dog's chest rose and fell in a slow, content rhythm. His ears were still. His eyes were mostly closed. No sirens. No engines idling. No footsteps in the dark. Just stillness. Ryan leaned back. He let the weight in his chest, the weight that had lived there so long he had stopped registering its presence, settle into something different. Not lifted. Not gone. But acknowledged. Known. Carried rather than dragged. Max lifted his head once, met Ryan's gaze with the quiet certainty of a creature that had never once doubted where it belonged. Then rested again. Outside, the wind moved across the desert. Gentle. Unhurried. Not a warning, just a presence. The world continuing to do what it did. Ryan brought the coffee to his mouth. Tasted the warmth of it. And for the first time and longer than he could precisely remember, the morning asked nothing of him but this. To be in it. Here's what I keep thinking about when I think about this story. It wasn't the confrontation that mattered most. It wasn't the documents, or the investigation, or the names that eventually made it into headlines. It was 4 words, whispered by a frightened woman to a stranger in a corner booth. Please pretend you're my grandson. She didn't ask him to save her. She didn't know who he was or what he'd been or what he was capable of. She saw a man sitting alone with a dog, and something in her, something underneath logic, underneath strategy, said, there. And he could have said no. He could have looked away, the way every other person in that diner was prepared to. He could have chosen the much simpler path of not being involved. He didn't. Because some people, not all, but some, are built for exactly the moment that asks the most of them. Not because they're fearless. Not because they have nothing to lose. But because they understand, somewhere in the part of themselves that hasn't been worn down yet, that walking away from something that matters is its own kind of damage. The courage wasn't in the standoff. The courage was in that single word. Grandma. Said out loud. Certain. Committed. That was where it changed. The rest, the documents, the investigation, the justice, all of that grew from one man who chose not to look away. We don't always get to choose when we're needed. But we always get to choose what we do when we are. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that ordinary people still do extraordinary things in ordinary places at 2 in the morning, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've ever had a moment where you chose not to walk away. Those stories matter too. Like this video if you believe in the kind of quiet courage that doesn't make the news. Subscribe so you're here for the next one, because there are more stories where this came from, and every single one of them is about real people, real moments, and the choices that define them. May something good find you today, wherever you are. We'll see you in the next one.